Hello and welcome. In this video we're going to improve on our previous postfix email server installation by setting up multiple email servers for our network. So we're going to look at some of the parameters that you would use as your network expands to have multiple email servers and have them able to communicate with each other. And we would do this because there's a really important weakness in the simple mail server setup that we had before from my previous video where we did a single machine and we set up things like my host name, my destination, my origin, INET interfaces. And I think I left my domain out of that list. That gave us a perfectly functional email server for a very, very small network. But once you start scaling that up, where it is just too much traffic for a single server to handle, well, that starts getting a bit more complicated. You need to start having parameters that will have your multiple mail transport agents or mail submission agents able to communicate with each other. So let's take a look at the simple setup that we had in my previous video, where we have one mail server, which I had called mail1.demodomain.ca. We told it its domain was demodomain.ca, or we just didn't explicitly set those two parameters, but we had set the host name correctly, so it still worked. If we had set my origin to my host name, which we had started with, and we set INET interfaces to all, it works. You can send email out and it shows that it's from some user at machine.whatever domain, and that arrives at the server on the other end from some user at some domain. And if somebody wants to respond, well, they respond back to some user at some domain. That gets looked up in that DNS MX record at the bottom of the screen, and it says, okay, the machine that handles email is mail1.demodomain.ca. Send email to it, and it arrives and it goes into the message store and everything's fine. But when your network gets bigger and you have a few hundred or a few thousand client machines behind that email server and they're all trying to talk to that server to get their email, you're going to need more than one server to handle that. That will just be too much traffic for one machine to deal with. So we would set up a second email server. And of course an MX record for that as well, to say mail for the domain is handled by this machine. But this creates a problem. So that machine sends out mail, and if somebody connects to it, they're now user at mail2.demodomain.ca. So the email arrives to whoever we're trying to correspond with as user from mail2.demodomain.ca. And now that person that we're talking to has two different email addresses for us and is confused as to which one they should respond to. And our users now have to log into multiple different email servers to try to check their email. So that's a problem. You can't run email this way. So a solution to this is to set my origin to be my domain, or hard code in the domain name, like we had done at the end of the previous video. That way, when either of those machines... Oh, sorry, the slide is still showing I thought I had clicked one more. So the old way, if you have my origin set to my host name, if either machine is sending email out, it's from user at that machine.demodomain.ca. The person we're talking to sees two different email addresses and stops talking to us because we obviously don't know what we're doing. Instead, we set my origin to be my domain. That way, when mail gets sent out from either of those email servers, it shows up as being from user at whatever our domain is. In the case of my example here, user at demodomain.ca. And when it arrives at its destination, the person we are trying to correspond with, it shows up as being from user at demodomain.ca. So now they only have one email address to respond to, and we demonstrate that we are far more competent. And when they respond, well, okay, this still doesn't solve the problem on our end that our users now still have to worry about 2 email servers, but that solution's coming. This does solve the problem of corresponding with someone and them seeing 2. When we do it this way, they will only see the one server, and they can respond to that server. Of course, in order to accept that, we did need to set up that mydestination parameter. And as we saw in the previous video, this deals with when that email shows up at our machine and it's addressed to user at a domain, mydestination determines, is that a domain that I am responsible for email for? If it is, we'll accept it and figure out the user later. Or potentially bounce it back and say, no, you've got the right domain, but we have no user at that name, though that's less likely to happen these days with spam and everything. So this is very much like myOrigin, but it's the opposite side of it. It's for incoming mail. And so we override that default mydestination to include my domain, and now all of our email servers can accept email for a user at whatever our domain is. But yes, we still have that issue. We now have 2 or more mailboxes on several different servers. There's a few different ways that we could fix this. You could potentially set up some form of network storage and remotely mount that message store onto all of your email servers. But that's passing this problem on to another service. We're not going to do that. We're going to fix it ourselves. But we will need several more parameters to do this. Number 1 is relay domains. And what this allows us to do when an email arrives at our server, instead of accepting it and figuring out how to put it in the message store using the local delivery agent, we can just say, I'll accept it, but it's not really for me. I'm going to quietly in the background pass it on to this other mail server. And this allows us to have any of our mail servers accept that mail that's coming in from some other organization coming into our domain, and then all of those servers but one just filter that mail to the place that actually has our message store. If we're going to do this, we use this parameter relay domains to say this is a domain that I will relay incoming mail for. But if we do that, it means we don't put that domain in mydestination. Because if we do that, well, mydestination actually gets checked before relay domains, so it would make this server actually accept and store the email instead of trying to relay it to its server, or the correct server. So, in improvement to our solution, our mail servers are very similar to what we had last time around. They're all using, my host name is their host name, my domain is the domain, my origin is the domain. They've all got iNet interfaces set to at least something that allows them to accept incoming mail. So this way, when they send email out, it shows up from whatever user at our domain. It reaches its destination. That person sees the email. We've demonstrated to them we actually know how to run email servers now. They respond, and it comes back into our domain. Well, ideally, their server is going to use DNS to look up who's the mail server for demodomain.ca, see that MX record that we created that says it should go to mail1.demodomain.ca, and the email gets sent there. Great. But the whole point of having potentially multiple MX records is sometimes that will fail. And we don't want that email to just disappear. Now, it could be mail 1 is down for maintenance. It could be that it's just too busy to accept the incoming request right now. So that's why we have that second MX record with a different priority value. It's always rough trying to describe that priority value as higher or lower because a higher number is lower priority. So the 20 should get mail passed to it after attempts to contact the 10. So suppose email gets sent to mail 2. That's okay. If we look, its my destination does not include my domain, so it won't actually accept and store that email, but we set relay domains to be my domain, and it will look that up and say, oh, the server that's actually responsible for that domain is mail1, so in the background, quietly, without that other person we're corresponding with ever needing to know, the email gets passed on to the correct machine. And that allows us to centralize those mailboxes for all of our users on that one machine, and they can now access them from a central location. You can do similar kinds of relaying for outgoing mail as well. For that, we would use relay host. Now, normally, as we've already seen, when you are sending outgoing email, your server will do a DNS lookup to try to find the MX record for the receiving domain and pass the email to that server. But you can override that. If you use relay host, you can specify this machine is not going to do a DNS lookup. It will just pass all outgoing email to some other server. So this way, we can keep our multiple internal email servers pretty much invisible from public DNS lookups. They all relay host their email to the email server we want other people to see. It accepts that, passes it on to the outside world, and then whoever we're corresponding with only sees that server. This does require that either that machine has a correct MX record, or better yet, a correct sender policy framework configuration in DNS, but that's a topic for a whole nother video that I think I recorded several years back, so I'm not going to touch that here. If either of those is set up correctly, again, preferably SPF, the mail servers that we are corresponding with will view this as legitimate mail from our organization because it is coming from and has been handled by a mail server for our organization, so they'll accept it. For that outgoing relay to work, though, the server we're relaying through must be willing to accept and relay that mail. And there's two possible parameters you can use to control this: mynetworks style and mynetworks. And I'll tell you right now, mynetworks is the better way to go, and we'll explain why in a moment. When we are allowing a relay like this, guaranteed you will want to limit this relay capability so that only your machines can use it, and only the ones you expect to actually be sending out mail, and not anybody else. If you allow just anybody to pass email to your machine to be then delivered on to some other destination, what you have is called an open relay, and just anybody on the internet can hand you a piece of mail saying, hey, send this to some organization and make it look like it came from you. Spammers will love you if you do that. Everybody else will hate you. Your domain could potentially even get blacklisted by security companies, and just no other servers would accept mail sent from your domain. So we really don't want that to happen. So we would need one of mynetwork style, which we'll discuss first, or better yet, mynetworks, which we'll get to in a moment. With mynetwork style, you're specifying just in general the scale of machines that are allowed to relay mail through you. And you can pick either class, subnet, or host. Class is a little bit outdated. It says every machine in the same class-sized network, Whether that's Class A, Class B, or Class C is just determined based on what IP address you're using, and if it's expected to be a Class A, Class B, or Class C. Realistically speaking, though, you're probably using some form of private IP address inside your own organization, and you might have resized that to something non-standard. So better yet, you could use subnet, in which case it will just look up the machine's actual address and the size of network that it thinks it in, and just say, okay, every other machine in this same subnet is allowed to relay mail through me, which is certainly better than picking the class, but it raises the issue. A number of those machines are probably not email servers. If they are trying to relay email through your relay machine, something has probably gone wrong. So you probably don't want to do that. If you don't want to do relaying at all, you can set this one to host, in which case this will not relay outgoing mail for any other machine. It will only send mail that originates at itself. So if you're not doing relaying, that's the way to go. If you are doing relaying, the better alternative to mynetworks style is mynetworks. And this allows you to use several more complicated forms or just a simple comma-separated list of the network's IP addresses, or I believe even host names, of the machines that you trust and will relay for. So in my network, I'm using 192.168.122.0/24 for this demo domain.ca. So if I said my networks equals that would be the equivalent of saying subnet back here. I'm saying I trust every machine in that network to, and I will relay mail for them. I'm hoping I can. Nobody else has access to this network. But realistically speaking, in a workplace scenario, you should not be doing that. Pick the IP addresses of the specific machines that you should be relaying mail for. That way, if somebody does manage to compromise one of your machines that's not an email server and tries to start sending spam with it and relay it through your machine, it doesn't work. So let's see that here. I've actually replaced my gateway machine now with a mail3.demodomain.ca, and when either mail1 or mail2 are sending mail out, they're still using my origin as my domain, but they're now also using relay host. So instead of using DNS to look up where am I sending this email, they just automatically pass it to mail3. Mail3 will figure it out, and those machines can get back to doing whatever it is they're supposed to do. And all mail3 will do is relay this outgoing mail to the outside world. Of course, in this case, I've set up mynetworks, which I think I have a typo there. It does not have an underscore in it, or shouldn't have an underscore. There we are, mynetworks. It will relay mail for mail1 or mail2, and to the outside world, this mail visibly got handled by mail3.demodomain.ca, and again, we would need an MX record, or better yet, a sender policy framework record to indicate mail for this domain must be handled by mail3. Now, I know you saw when I fixed my typo that machine in the background. This time, I'm not setting up a live demonstration for this. I simply do not have the scale of machines necessary to simulate several hundred client machines, 3 mail servers, a gateway, and something similar on the other end of the connection. What we have looked at in this video is a few parameters that we can use to make our mail servers work together better, so that when we start having several hundred or several thousand client machines, we're not just overloading a single server trying to be our mail server. We can distribute those capabilities potentially across several mail servers, so we can divide up the responsibilities for incoming and outgoing mail, still have it all look like it came from the same place, and still have it arrive at a single destination so that our clients can check it. And this is a really good time to pitch my video on Sender Policy Framework. Again, really important thing, if you are setting up email servers for an organization, you should be using something like Sender Policy Framework to explicitly state, these are the machines that handle mail for my organization. And if anybody else is trying to, they're lying. I'll see you there.